A further escalation of the trade war between Canada and the United States has been narrowly avoided for now. But the back and forth threats caused the worst stock market slide in recent years and have left a cloud of uncertainty over major North American industries. Trade expert and consultant Dmitry Grozoubinski joins us now for a closer look at these trade war tactics. Dmitry, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Such a pleasure to be with you.
All right, so I want to know, what do you make of Trump's actions here? Because even though he did back down from doubling the steel and aluminum tariffs, the original 25% tariffs still took effect today. So do threats actually work in a trade war?
They can if you use them intelligently and if they're backed up by a large economy, as the US is. The issue for President Trump and the American people at the moment is that there is not a lot of forethought or planning or strategy going into this approach. And it's not clear, I think, even to the Canadian people, what a victory for Donald Trump would even look like. He keeps changing the grievance du jour that he is claiming to want to address, from fentanyl at the border all the way through to, frankly, crazy things like annexation, which makes it very, very difficult for Canada to give him what he wants, even if they wanted to. And he is making it very difficult for them to want to do that.
Well, that's right. So, Dimitri, on the Canadian side of things, we've seen that the province of Ontario did try to fight fire with fire, threatening to put a surcharge on electricity supplied to several U.S. states. Do you think this was a smart move? And is this how Canada should be responding to Trump's actions?
When it comes to trade policy that makes the news, what is a smart move economically often takes second seat to the politics of it all. And the fact is that the Trump administration has created for itself a situation where Canadian politicians can earn applause domestically by sticking up to him and by punching back. And I think that's the dynamic we're seeing at play. But I would also say that the American people, while it's a very large and rich economy, I don't think they're hugely invested in the trade war with Canada, and I don't think they have a lot of appetite for pain when it comes to punches heading the other way, which is why I think what Ontario did very quickly led to negotiations and hopefully de-escalation.
Now, do you think there's any method to this tariff madness? And what I mean by that is, do you think the Trump administration is maybe trying to force Canada and its other trading partners to align more with American policies and reduce ties with China? What political and geographical forces do you think are driving this particular trade war?
So I think, first of all, this is a methods first approach. Donald Trump is fond of tariffs as a policy tool, both because of the way that he imagines they work, but secondly, because he can deploy them himself without going to Congress, and frankly, without a lot of effective checks and balances on how he uses them. He can use them to punish and reward with the stroke of a pen. And so a lot of what we're seeing is he begins from the conclusion, which is that he should hit someone with tariffs, and then kind of goes looking for a grievance or a strategy. With that said, he is correct, which is that when an economy as large as the US, with as many consumers as the US, threatens another country with loss of access to those consumers with tariffs, those other countries will at least come to the negotiating table and sit across from the US and talk. So, to the extent that there is a strategy here, it is that the US has all manner of constantly shifting grievances, and it has this tool that the Trump administration can deploy whenever it wants and however it wants to try to move on those grievances. Whether that is going to be effective remains to be seen, and there's some evidence to say that there are some real problems with the approach.
All right, now, what do you think the problems with the approach are at this point? Where do you see this trade war going? How do you see it resolving itself? Can it resolve itself at this point?
There are a number of challenges with this approach. One is they are constantly using artillery when a scalpel would be smarter. So a lot of the time when they are threatening to or putting tariffs in place, they're doing it on something like all products, or they're doing it on products that the American industry needs and can't easily replace, which means that they are making it harder for themselves to maintain their own offensive. Whereas what Canada and the European Union now are doing are being much more tactical and targeting finished products, products in politically sensitive districts, things like agricultural production, bourbon, things that can cause the US political pain without causing Canadians or now Europeans as much pain from the tariffs. So that is one flaw with the approach. The other flaw with the approach is that they are being so belligerent about this that, as I said earlier, they are creating political incentives for other governments to fight them and to not give them what they want, even when maybe raw economics would say, "Oh, just buy them off." They're making it harder for other political leaders to meet them halfway because of the way that they are acting and the way that they are messaging all this. They are being such bullies that I think the voting public in the countries they're dealing with is increasingly expecting their leaders to stand up. And that makes it harder as well.
And Dmitry, Ontario's premier is meeting with the U.S. Commerce Secretary tomorrow to renegotiate the free trade treaty known as the USMCA. Now, the original renegotiation date for that was actually set for next year. What role do trade agreements like this play in escalating or, say, limiting and resolving trade wars?
Well, up until this year, I would have said that trade agreements are one after a dispute has been resolved, they're a way to lock in the parties and lock in the result. So you've come to some kind of arrangement, you write it down in a legally binding treaty that both sides will follow, and that gives both sides the confidence that the deal will be honored. Of course, the Trump administration has shown that they don't hugely consider agreements, including ones that they've negotiated themselves, like the USMCA, hugely binding when they rub up against things that they want to do. With that said, the USMCA kind of talking about it in those terms provides a framework for the discussions so that they can cover multiple issues at once. So it's not focused on one particular hot point, and it allows you to cobble together some kind of new working arrangement. With that said, a negotiation without Mexico in the room raises a lot of questions for me about how viable this is going to be.
All right, and Dmitry, what leverage do smaller economies like Canada have in disputes with larger economies like the United States?
Look, absolutely, the US market is worth more to Canada than the Canadian market is to the US by simple sort of numbers and consumers. So you have less of what they want than they have of what you want, and that lessens your leverage. With that said, Canada is a large, wealthy economy. There are certainly things that Americans want to sell to Canadians and keep selling to Canadians. And that gives Canada a decent amount of leverage to push for the things it wants and push back on the things it really doesn't want to give.
All right. What factors and strategies usually lead to the resolution of a trade war? And which ones could we see entering this trade war to sort of help resolve or get it on the path to resolution between Canada and the US?
I mean, by far the most important thing is probably to get it out of the headlines. The best thing from a Canadian perspective would be for this to move into a phase where it's frankly geeks like me in a windowless conference room arguing about sort of the minutia of a tariff schedule or sort of the exact regulations on what makes a high grade cut of beef and that kind of thing, which creates a process, brings the temperature right down so that nobody is trying to score points, nobody's trying to look tough, and it becomes much more of a by the numbers technical negotiation. That tends to kind of lead to a resolution once you have some political will to get it there. The question is, firstly, will that political will manifest? And hopefully this upcoming meeting is a sign that it might. And secondly, frankly, will the Trump administration have the discipline to allow the process to run its course without some new or some existing grievance restart, throwing a spanner into the works halfway through?
All right, well, time will tell, but it's been a surprise nearly every day of this new administration. So, Dmitry, thank you very much for shedding light on this topic. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much and stand strong, guys.
That's trade expert and consultant Dmitry Grozoubinski.